It was a Wednesday night just like any other, but inside me there was an emptiness that was hard to describe. Breakups are always tough, even when you know it's for the best. I was trying to stay strong after breaking up with my boyfriend of 2.5 years. It wasn't anything dramatic or full of fights, we just grew apart. But still, the absence of his presence felt like a constant weight in my day-to-day life. Simple things brought memories. A song playing on the radio, the smell of a dish we used to share, or even a pool table. The pool table. That was our thing. He was amazing at it, the kind of person who would make shots that left anyone speechless. And me? Well, I was good too, but he had this natural skill that was impossible to ignore. Playing together was more than just competition. It was our escape, our way of connecting and forgetting about the world around us. But now, without him, the silence at home seemed to scream in my ears, and loneliness pushed me into a state of restlessness. On this particular night, the idea of being alone at home was unbearable. I looked at my pool cue leaning against the wall and decided I needed to get out, change the environment. After hesitating for a while, I found myself putting on my jacket and deciding to head to one of the bars we used to go to. It wasn't about nostalgia. At least that's what I tried to tell myself. I just needed a distraction to feel something different, anything other than this suffocating weight. When I got to the bar, the atmosphere was exactly as I remembered. Old pool, tables, worn-out stools, and a jukebox playing some nostalgic tune. It was a place that carried history, but that night, it felt like a place where the past and the present were ready to collide in a way I couldn't have predicted. When I got to the bar, I'll admit I hesitated before walking in. I stood at the door for a few seconds, trying to prepare myself for whatever I might find inside. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, maybe a distraction or just a place to let my thoughts run wild. The air was fresh but heavy with a tension that only I seemed to feel. As soon as I stepped inside, the environment enveloped me like an old friend. The scent of polished wood mixed with a light aroma of beer and fried food, the muffled voices of regulars chatting, and the classic rock soundtrack echoing through the space. It was a strange comfort, but familiar. The bar looked exactly as I remembered, except for one detail. At the corner pool table where we'd played together so many times, there was a group of strangers. They laughed, played, and seemed completely unaware of the whirlwind of memories that place brought to me. I decided to order a drink and sat on a stool near the counter. My goal was to stay quiet, observe, and maybe gather the courage to play a game, alone. That's when I noticed someone standing out in the crowd. He was at the table next to mine, holding the pool cue with a casual confidence that didn't seem forced. His movements were precise, and the way he aimed at the ball gave the impression that each shot was calculated. Something about him caught my attention, but I tried to ignore it. After all, I was there for myself, not to notice others. But fate had other plans. As I looked down at my drink, I heard the sound of balls colliding, and then his voice. Calm, with a touch of humor. "Are you admiring the game or just trying to decide if you want to join in?" I looked up, surprised. He was staring at me with a smile that seemed genuinely friendly. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My heart skipped a beat, not out of romantic interest, but because of the unexpected way he broke the silence of my solitude. I quickly responded, trying not to seem flustered, and before I knew it, he invited me to play. I should have declined, but something in me wanted to accept. Maybe it was the desire to connect with someone, even if just for a moment. Or maybe it was the nostalgia of being back at a pool table. I picked up the cue with a mix of nervousness and excitement, not realizing that this casual encounter would completely change the course of my night, and maybe something more. The game started quietly, with the two of us exchanging a few casual words as the game unfolded. But as I focused on my shots, something in the air between us began to shift. The balls on the table clicked together with precision, but it was his gaze that unsettled me. It wasn't just any gaze. It was a look that seemed to read something deeper within me, as if he was trying to understand every move, not just on the table but inside me too. I tried not to look back, focusing on the balls in front of me, the cue in my hands, slightly, sweaty. But inadvertently, our eyes met again. He had this way of looking as if he knew exactly what was going on in my head, as if he had already read every thought before I could even organize them. It made me uncomfortable yet strangely curious. It was as if the game of pool had become a metaphor for something greater between us. An unspoken game, a challenge of glances and subtle signals. I made my shots, but with every strike, he watched me, and I felt a rising warmth in my chest. It wasn't just the tension of the game, it was the tension of something more, something unnamed but present hanging between us. Suddenly, one of my bolder shots made him break into a smile, not a victory smile, but one of appreciation, as if he was more interested in my playing style than the actual result. I laughed, trying to keep my composure, but inside something was stirring. It was like for a moment I was doing more than just playing pool. I was participating in a psychological game, a game of unspoken intentions. That's when he spoke, with that soft tone that almost felt like a provocation. "You're challenging me, aren't you?" Not knowing how to respond immediately, I shook my head, trying to hide the tension that was slowly taking over me. After all, who was really challenging who here? The game of pool? Or something more complex, something we both knew was happening, but neither of us wanted to admit openly? The answer, no matter how much I wanted to find it, seemed to get lost in those same colored balls, which now, for me, represented more than just pieces of a game. They were symbols, clues to something about to unfold. And so, the game continued, but with every shot, every glance, the feeling that there was more at stake than just winning the match grew stronger. 3. Game was coming to an end and the silence was growing heavy. With every move I made, my mind filled with questions I didn't know how to answer. I tried to focus on the remaining balls on the table, but my mind was more focused on him, on his looks that seemed to penetrate deeper than the surface. Suddenly he spoke, breaking the silence in a way that was almost unsettling. "I knew you'd play like that," he said, a subtle smile on his lips as if he were challenging me to figure out what he really meant by that. I, trying to keep my composure, simply raised an eyebrow, unsure if he was talking about the game or if there was something else, something he was implying without saying it outright. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tinged with a slight tension, not wanting to give the impression that I was bothered. But the truth was, I was starting to feel increasingly uncomfortable with what was happening between us, among the colored balls and the sound of the cue striking the table. He didn't seem interested in making me comfortable. In fact, it seemed like he was enjoying seeing me lost, not knowing how to react. "I pick up on things, you know," he continued, and his words cut through the air around us like a sharp blade. "The way you move, how you react to each shot. You're not just here to win, you're trying to hide something, like there's something you don't want to show." I felt like I was a piece of a puzzle he'd already put together, like he knew more about me than I did myself. And to be honest, it unsettled me deeply. I didn't want him to know more than he should. The game, which had been nothing more than a distraction, had turned into a mental battleground, and I wasn't so sure anymore about who was in control. I tried to evade, focusing again on the balls on the table, as if the movement of the cue could protect me from any invasion of thoughts. But he didn't give up. "You don't need to protect yourself from me," he said, his voice softer now, almost like a promise. "I just want to understand you. Somehow you're challenging me too, and I don't know what that means yet. But I'm curious." And there, in the midst of that conversation, something strange happened. I felt like a wall inside me started to crumble, like the truth I'd been avoiding all this time began to seep in. I knew the play wasn't about the balls on the pool table anymore. The real play was between the two of us. We were there, not just playing pool, but trying to understand what was really happening between us. In the end, the game ended, and I knew it wouldn't just be the table that separated us from there. The conversation we had and the way he looked at me would stay with me long after I left. I wondered how long I could keep hiding what was beginning to form between us. Would I allow the game to continue? Only time would tell, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't really about the pool table after all. I don't usually have a hectic life, but it's stable. I'm Marco, 40 years old, single, and childless, living a quiet routine. Some might even think it's a bit dull, but honestly, I don't mind. I have a steady job, live in a simple but comfortable house, and the only person I need to answer to is myself. I work as a bartender at a sophisticated rooftop bar, a high-end establishment in a neighboring city. The clientele is always the same. People who believe simpler bars are for other people. As for me, I'm not one for flaunting my lifestyle. I'm far from that kind of luxury, but it's what I do to get by. The bar is located in a peaceful neighborhood in a beautiful spot, about 20 minutes away. Though it's not the life I'd choose, I have to admit the tips are great, and the people who visit don't hesitate to spend money. The variety of customers keeps things interesting. At a place like that, you never see the same faces every night. I think that's one of the reasons I enjoy my job so much. There's no time to get bored. Besides, as a bartender, I get to observe people with a more critical eye. I enjoy watching and mentally playing games with customers, trying to figure out who's there to impress and who just wants to forget life for a while. That Friday, the bar was especially crowded. As usual, couples on dates, friends gathering to celebrate anything, and those who were clearly just there to feel important. I always try to identify the types. When someone orders a complicated cocktail, it's almost always a sign they're trying to show something off. Those who ask for something simpler like whiskey are usually more relaxed, having spent the whole day trying to be something they're not. I was focused on the bar's hustle when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something strange. A man walked in. He looked out of place, as if this wasn't his kind of place. The first thing that caught my attention was the expression on his face. Pure anger. He looked so furious that you could almost feel the tension in the air. His hair, messy and dark as night, was tangled. He wore a black hoodie under a dirty leather jacket, and I'd never seen him before. The odd thing was, he didn't sit down or approach the bar like everyone else. He just stood there staring at me. It made me immediately uncomfortable, as if he had something in mind that I couldn't understand. I tried to stay calm, but something in his energy was making me nervous. How had he gotten past the bouncer at the door? That only added to my unease. I walked over to him, trying to act normal. I asked if he'd like something to drink, but he just stared at me, silent. For a moment, I thought he was about to attack me, but he did nothing, just stared, as if preparing to say something I didn't want to hear. After a while, he finally spoke. "A double shot of Jaeger," he said, his voice deep and low. Jägermeister wasn't exactly the most popular drink at the bar, but if someone asks, you serve it. I prepared the shot and set it in front of him, thinking I'd get back to my work. When I returned to collect the payment, what he did next made me even more uncomfortable. He threw a bunch of crumpled money onto the counter. In this place, no one pays like that. People always pay with a card, not to mention the bad manners. My stomach turned. I was already starting to question this man when he said something that froze me completely. "I knew I'd find you here, Marco." That made my blood run cold. How did he know my name? I froze, still trying to process what I had just heard. I didn't recognize him from anywhere. I stood there, paralyzed, waiting for an explanation, but he said nothing more. Instead, he just stared at me with that furious look, like he was getting ready for a battle I didn't even know was about to begin. He then said, "I know what you did." And before I could react or ask anything, he turned and walked toward the elevators. I wanted to go after him, shout, but something told me it was better to do nothing. I was on my shift, and the most important thing was to keep working. I stood there, frozen, watching his figure disappear. He left, but his words stayed in my mind. "I know what you did." That was all I could think about for the rest of the night. After that night, Luis's words kept pounding in my head. I, Marco, couldn't understand how he knew my name, or how he was so sure of something I didn't remember doing. What did he mean by "I know what you did"? It didn't make any sense. I wasn't one to get involved in trouble. My job was to keep things in line, avoid any kind of issue. And yet, he seemed to have some information about me, something I couldn't pinpoint. How did he know something I didn't remember? I tried to continue with my routine, but the questions wouldn't leave my mind. The next day, as usual, I went to work. The bar was busy, but I was distracted. The previous night had affected me more than I cared to admit. I had this constant feeling of being watched, like that man might be somewhere, keeping an eye on me. When night fell, something strange happened. It wasn't my usual shift, but I was there, behind the bar, arranging the bottles and organizing the space. Suddenly, the atmosphere felt different. The sound of music, the conversations in the background, everything seemed a little more distant, like the world had slowed down. That's when I saw him again. Luis was standing there by the door with that fixed stare as if he was waiting for me. I felt a tension in the air. He didn't come closer, but he was looking at me the same way as before, with a vacant look, like he was waiting for me to do something. I didn't know what he wanted, but something inside me told me it wasn't a good idea to stay there for much longer. At that moment, no one around could help me, and his presence, though silent, made me uneasy. Without thinking too much, I decided to confront him. I left the bar and walked up to him, trying to keep my calm, though anxiety rushed through my body. When I approached, he simply said, "I didn't want to have to do this, Marco." His words were low and his voice seemed colder than ever. My mind was spinning. What did he know? What did he want from me? I tried to understand, but the feeling of fear was paralyzing. I couldn't react immediately, and he continued to watch me with an ironic smile, as if he knew something much more serious was about to happen. "You'll remember soon enough. Don't worry," he said, and turned to leave. Once again, he was walking away, but this time he didn't leave me in peace. Something was about to happen. I could feel it. I knew I couldn't just ignore him and go on with my life. What did he know? What was behind this story? I couldn't stay silent any longer. I needed to find out what was going on. And it was that night, as I watched Luis disappear into the night, that I decided I would get to the bottom of this story, even if it cost me more than I was ready to pay. The feeling of being stalked, of being watched, didn't go away. I couldn't keep living like this, with the feeling that my life was about to be turned upside down. I needed to figure out what was going on and confront my past, something I had forgotten, but was now coming after me. That night, the tension was stronger than ever. I, Marco, couldn't ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Luis had said those cryptic words and disappeared, but now I couldn't run from it anymore. My body was on high alert, and my mind kept spinning. What did he mean by, "You'll remember soon enough"? What else did he know about me? I was involved in something much bigger than I realized, and I was starting to feel it deep down. I decided I couldn't let this story go unanswered. If he had something to tell me, I would find out. No matter what it was, I needed to understand what was happening and why Luis was so sure that I had done something terrible in the past. But for that, I needed to act fast. I couldn't wait for him to come to me again. I decided to go to the only place that could give me answers, my family's old office, which had been closed for many years. The building was silent when I arrived, and the smell of dust and old wood hit me as soon as I entered. My heart raced with every step I took. I knew something was about to be revealed there, but fear and curiosity were mixing inside me. What would I find in that office that could change everything? When I entered the small room, the dim light from the lamp illuminated only part of the space, casting shadows that seemed to move. The drawers were all locked, but I didn't hesitate to search for the key. I needed to know what was hidden there. Finally, I found the key tucked inside a small paper envelope. With trembling hands, I inserted it into the lock and turned. Inside the drawer, I found a stack of yellowed papers and old documents. Most of them had no names, just numbers and symbols. But when I flipped through the pages, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A name. My name. And next to it, an address I didn't recognize. I froze. This was real. Everything Luis had said was tied to something bigger, something buried in the past. What was going on, and why did it feel like everything I had ever known was about to fall apart? I've always worked as a bartender at a bar and restaurant in the suburbs of Baltimore. The place is busy and has a unique vibe. There are no waiters, just bartenders and cooks in the back. The service is a little chaotic, but that's what keeps the pace fast and interesting. That night didn't seem any different from many others. The bar was packed with college students, dancing and shouting to the music. The atmosphere was lively and full of energy, but for me, it was just another night of work. I loved the chaos of serving drinks, hearing people's stories, and feeding off the crowd's energy. But in the midst of it all, something caught my attention. That's when I saw the couple. They walked in quietly, without making much noise, and sat at one of the tables in the corner of the restaurant. They were older, maybe in their 70s, dressed simply but elegantly. At first glance, everything seemed completely normal, except for the fact that, with all the excitement in the place, it was unusual for such an elderly couple to be there, surrounded by loud, dancing young people. I had a slight feeling of unease but didn't think much of it and went back to my work. However, something in the back of my mind couldn't stop thinking about them. There was something different about that couple, something that didn't quite fit. It was like they were out of place, disconnected from the environment they were in. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I started obsessing over the idea that something wasn't right. While I served another round of tequila shots to a loud group of students, I kept watching the couple from afar. They seemed oblivious to everything around them, sitting in silence, not ordering anything. Even with the loud music and the clamor of the crowd, they were unfazed. The man stared blankly at the wall while the woman seemed to absorb every detail of the environment, but without truly interacting with anything. I was interrupted by another drink order, but the image of the couple stayed with me, like a shadow I couldn't ignore. It wasn't normal. I knew that. The night went on with its frantic pace, but I couldn't take my eyes off the couple. They were still there, sitting oddly still, making no noise, not moving. There was something unsettling about their stillness, a sense that they were there, but at the same time they weren't. I was in the middle of preparing a round of gin and tonics when, for the second time that night, I saw them again. The couple was in the same spot, but now something had changed. Their expressions were even more intense, more fixed. The woman, named Agnes, seemed lost in the emptiness of the wall in front of her, showing no sign of life. Her eyes were so lost in space that a chill ran down my spine. She didn't seem human, or at least not like a normal person. The man, Anton, was equally immersed in that state, but his eyes... When he slowly turned his head to look at me, I felt the blood freeze in my veins. He moved with an unnatural slowness, like he was in slow motion, his eyes deep and almost empty, a distant shadow of something that was once human. The gaze he gave me was heavy, as though he was trying to reach me in a way that wasn't physical, but rather mental. I tried to ignore it, tried to go back to my work, but an uncomfortable feeling surrounded me, as if something invisible was watching me. I took a deep breath, tried to shake it off, and went back to my duties, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those two were watching my every move. They hadn't ordered anything yet, but somehow it was clear they weren't normal customers. The place was full of people laughing, dancing, and eating, but they remained motionless. Like a statue you can't stop looking at, as if their presence was a hole in time, mismatched and odd. It was when I served another customer that I looked back at the couple one more time. Agnes and Anton were exactly as before, their eyes fixed, and their expressions empty, showing no sign that they were aware of me or anything else in the bar. What disturbed me most was that when I looked at them, I couldn't tell if they were looking at me or if they were just looking through me. I was beginning to doubt my sanity. The environment around them was in complete contrast to their rigidity, and it seemed like time had stopped around them. I was restless, but also curious. What was going on here? Eventually, the night started to calm down a bit, the frantic rhythm of drinks and dancing giving way to a quieter atmosphere. But I still couldn't stop thinking about that couple. It was as if some invisible force was pulling me, so I looked at the table where Agnes and Anton were sitting. And that's when everything changed. When our eyes met, I froze for a second. It was a direct stare, unwavering, without any sign. of recognition or sympathy. Something much deeper was happening there, something I couldn't understand. She, with her eyes locked on mine, didn't blink. The coldness and intensity of her gaze cut through me like a frozen bolt. I tried to look away, trying to seem busy, but the feeling of being watched by those eyes was palpable. They were challenging me in a way that was impossible to ignore. My stomach churned, and for a moment the beat of my heart seemed to stop. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't natural. I took a deep breath and quickly went back to work, trying to escape the growing sense of dread. But as if the situation wasn't strange enough, I looked again, and to my surprise, the table was empty. I stood there for a few seconds, processing what had just happened. Agnes and Anton were gone. There was no sign that they had gotten up or left the restaurant. A chill ran down my spine. They weren't there anymore, but the feeling that they were still somehow watching every move I made didn't go away. That feeling was like a weight on my mind, a discomfort so strong that it made me question whether it had all been a hallucination. Maybe I was too tired, or maybe the environment was making me paranoid. But a part of me knew that wasn't it. Something was very wrong, and I still couldn't understand what was happening. For a moment I thought about going back to the table to check, but something inside me stopped me. I already knew what I would find: emptiness. As I continued working, trying to push away the discomfort that the experience had caused, the night dragged on slowly. I was trying to process what had happened with the strange couple, but as time passed, doubts started to consume me. Maybe I had seen things, maybe I had imagined it all, but deep down I knew it wasn't normal. Something was definitely wrong. When the night came to an end and the last customers began to leave, I was almost dying of curiosity. I couldn't help it. When I was finally alone with Karen, a co-worker who had been there for years, I decided to ask if she had noticed anything strange. She was always very observant and had an impressive memory. She knew everything that happened at the bar. I asked her if she had seen the elderly couple, and her response was a confused look. "Elderly couple? I don't know what you're talking about," she replied with a slight expression of surprise. I stood there speechless for a moment. I couldn't have imagined it. I was sure of what I had seen. I tried to explain better, but she just shook her head and said she didn't remember seeing anyone who fit that description. She then made a joke asking if I was hallucinating. This made me laugh nervously, but deep down I was terrified. How could someone not have noticed those people's presence? They were so out of place. And, even stranger, Karen seemed absolutely sure of what she was saying. She listed several people who had made orders that night, describing in detail what each person was wearing. How could she remember all of that and not remember Agnes and Anton? The feeling of discomfort and confusion was consuming me inside, but I tried to stay calm, laughing a little to cover up the growing panic. It was as if I was being pushed into a space where nothing made sense anymore. I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt, but Karen was there, completely indifferent. It just made things even more unsettling. How could someone as observant as her not have seen those strange figures? At the end of the night, when we finally locked up the bar and left, I was still processing everything. I felt like I was losing my sanity, and the questions wouldn't stop coming. Were those two real? Or was I going crazy? I didn't have any answers, but I knew this wasn't something I would easily forget. Something was very wrong, and I had no idea what was going. And that night was stranger than any other. The next day I woke up with the feeling that something was lurking, something I couldn't understand. The incident with the elderly couple kept pounding in my mind. No matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just a hallucination, my body wasn't lying. The fear was still there, like a shadow that wouldn't leave me in peace. When I got to work, I decided not to mention it to anyone, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. At the bar, everything seemed to follow its normal routine, but I was uneasy. The faces of the people seemed distant, like everything was in a kind of fog. In the afternoon, when the crowd thinned out and the sunlight hid behind the clouds, the phone rang. The call was from a woman, her voice distant and cold. "I hope you can get rid of them," she said simply before hanging up.